Good evening, welcome. I'm John. I'm the event director at Literati Bookstore. We're pleased to welcome Elisa Gabbert in support of the Unreality of Memory. She'll be in conversation this evening with the poet Ray McDaniel. Some Zoom etiquette. As you heard as you came in, you are muted. You will remain muted. Speaker view is going to be your ideal viewing experience. That way you'll just see whoever is speaking on your screen at any given time instead of a big block or big grid of blocks rather. And then we do ask that you keep your video off. You saw that probably as you're in the waiting room. So yeah, just keep your video off through the remainder of the event. We would appreciate that. And that's all that there is. Oh, you can keep your chat window open. The chat's closed, but I'll be in there to send a link to purchase the Unreality of Memory from our bookstore. And as well, you can use that to send me any questions you might have for a Q&A after Ray and Elisa talk. So whenever the spirit moves you, please, I encourage you to ask a question through the chat. And as a reminder, you can purchase the Unreality of Memory on our website, and I'll include a link, as I mentioned, in the chat. And if you're watching later on YouTube, there is a link in the description below. You can shop for thousands of more books at literatibookstore.com. Many of them are available for curbside pickup if you live near us in Southeast Michigan. Although a reminder that our street will be closed on Friday, so you'll probably want to find parking on 4th. In lieu of a book purchase, we'd also ask that you consider a $5 donation to sustain our virtual programming, whether you'd like to think of that as the subscription for this week or for the events in the month of September or for the remainder of the year. You can make a donation at literatibookstore.com/donation. Otherwise, we simply thank you for your attendance this afternoon, this evening, this morning, depending on wherever in the world you may be joining us from. So without further ado, Elisa Gabbert is the author of the poetry collections Layer Blue, The Self-Unstable, and The French Exit. Her debut collection of essays, The Word Pretty, was published in 2018. The Self-Unstable was chosen by the New York Times as one of the best books of 2013. Gabbert's work has appeared in the New Yorker, Boston Review, the Paris Review, Daily, Pacific Standard, Guernica, The Owl, Electric Literature, the Harvard Review, and many other venues. She lives in Denver, and she'll be speaking with our friend Raymond McDaniel, the author of The Cataracts, Special Powers and Abilities, Saltwater Empire, and Murder, a Violet, a National Poetry Series selection. Please join me in using your Zoom clap reactions or hearts or party favor explosions to welcome Elisa and Raymond to your living rooms.
Hi, y'all. I hope you can hear me okay. Thank you for anyone who was waiting for me. I just made my first big time zone mistake. I live in Denver. Sorry, I'm like out of breath because Ray sent me an email saying like, "Are you coming?" I was like, "Oh my God," because I thought I still had an hour to eat my dinner and pour a glass of wine, and I did that with lightning speed. So thank you for your patience. Yeah, I'm here now, and I'm going to try to be centered and present. I'm really excited to be here with Ray. He's a poet and critic that I've met a couple of times in person, but mostly just known through the internet and his work for a really long time. And it's nice to have an Ann Arbor local here with me and another poet critic type. I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about straddling those lines and what that means, if anything. I'm going to start by just with a quick reading from the book. It's about 5 pages, so that'll probably be about 5 minutes. I don't know. I haven't timed it, to be honest, but I'm only going to be turning the page like 3 times. So how long could it possibly take, right? This is the book. You've probably seen it before if you're here. I'm going to be reading from the essay that actually is probably getting the most attention these days because it's the one about plagues and pandemics, which obviously we're now all living through. So I know it seems very prescient, but I had no idea. I had no idea this was coming this year. Apologies. It's not too relevant to our moment because I wrote it before this moment happened. This is more about plagues in general and and kind of our fascination with the apocalypse, like the whole book is. All right, and I don't think you need to know anything, but if I notice I'm talking about something that I need to explain, I'll just interrupt and explain myself. There's a social media phenomenon I've started calling the performative death wish. I noticed it recently when archaeologists found an unopened Black sarcophagus in Alexandria. Some feared that the tomb might contain a deadly virus or bacteria or just a curse. After King Tut's tomb was opened in 1922, a number of people associated with the excavation died. "I'm pinning all my hopes on the creature in the sarcophagus," one woman tweeted. Another tweet went, 2012, "Oh no, Mayan calendar says the world might end and we could all die." 2018, "Please let the Black Egyptian sarcophagus carry a curse that will collectively put us all out of our misery." Whenever a story on the threat of an extinction level event, like an asteroid or comet headed for Earth, is making the rounds, people quote tweet it to add, "Finally, some good news." In this age of horrible news all the time, we understand it instantly. Ironic suicidal ideation. But there's something real behind it. The fantasy of the swift death, the instinct to just get it over with. Of course, the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs didn't kill them instantly, unless they were at ground zero. It wasn't IPU annihilation, to use the philosopher Galen Strawson's term. Instant, painless, unexperienced. It took tens of thousands, possibly even hundreds of thousands of years of living on a sick and barren planet before they all finally went extinct. This makes the prospect of death by asteroid much less merciful. Death may represent a kind of escape, but is this posturing really about wanting to escape, or is it about wanting to suffer? Lately, when I luck into an excellent bag of cherries or an especially luscious peach, I think automatically, I don't deserve this. When people say they're quitting social media because it doesn't make them happy, I think, wrong reason. I think we don't deserve to be happy. It feels related to the death wish, my own version of liberal guilt run amok, transformed into a longing for punishment. During the Black Death in Europe, bands of flagellants would roam from town to town like a traveling theater troupe, putting on public performances of violent self-punishment. They would flog themselves with leather and iron whips while crying out to God, "Spare us." As the historian Barbara Tuchman writes in A Distant Mirror, the flagellants saw themselves as redeemers who, by reenacting the scourging of Christ upon their own bodies and making the blood flow, would atone for human wickedness and earn another chance for mankind. In the absence of a better explanation, medieval people blamed themselves for the disease. Hardly an act or thought, sexual, mercantile, or military, did not contravene the dictates of the church. The result was an underground lake of guilt in the soul that the plague now tapped. But the flagellants didn't take all the blame. They also scapegoated the Jews, accusing them of poisoning wells. In Basel in 1349, Tuchman writes, the whole community of several hundred Jews was burned in a wooden house especially constructed for the purpose, a medieval concentration camp. Centuries later, we still have a tendency to interpret epidemics as punishment, divine or otherwise. When AIDS emerged in the early 1980s, it was seen as a natural and necessary corrective to gay liberation. People called it the gay plague. The televangelist Jerry Falwell said, AIDS is not just God's punishment for homosexuals, it is God's punishment for the society that tolerates homosexuals. Senator Jesse Helms thought people with AIDS brought it on themselves through their deliberate, disgusting, revolting conduct. As Susan Sontag noted in AIDS and its Metaphors, AIDS in the United States, at least, is understood as a disease not only of sexual excess, but of perversity, which makes it easy to view infection as retribution. When we don't understand the cause of a disease or how to treat it, we resort to magical thinking. Ebola was initially blamed on sorcery, or izanga, a Bakola word meaning some sort of vampirism or evil spirit, as David Quammen writes. Izanga could even be summoned and targeted at a victim, like casting a hex. But the sorcery explanation fell apart the more the illness spread. Sorcery does not kill without reason, does not kill everybody, and does not kill gorillas, one Mboma woman said. Even sorcery has its logic. The apparent senselessness of a new epidemic makes it even more frightening, so that every plague is a double plague of contagion and fear. The mystery of the contagion was the most terrible of all the terrors, Tuckman writes of the Black Death, quoting a Flemish cleric. Ignorance of the cause augmented the sense of horror. Guy de Chauliac, a doctor who treated 3 popes in succession, wrote that he lived in continual fear. Why is it so hard for me to imagine their fear? The centuries have a neutralizing effect. I imagine they accepted what they called the great mortality as a fact of history in the same way I do. The best medical science at the time of the Black Death almost came close to an approximate understanding of how the plague spread. That the infection came from contact was quickly observed, but not comprehended, Tuckman writes. Some thought it was transferred by sight, the evil eye. This is why plague masks had crystal eyepieces in addition to beaks stuffed with aromatics, to protect the wearer against both malevolent glances and miasma, the foul air that was really the stink of death. One physician determined that infection was communicated by means of air breathed in and out, which was true. The plague took several forms and could be spread through blood-to-blood contact like hepatitis or through coughing like tuberculosis or the flu. Garrett notes that conditions in European cities of the 15th to the 17th century were ideal for transmission of M. tuberculin, especially during the winter, when the practice was to shut all windows and huddle around a heat source, death by coziness. But since no one knew what germs were, the doctor had to assume the air was corrupted by planetary influences. In 1348, the medical faculty of the University of Paris delivered a report on the cause of the pestilence, a triple conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in the 40th degree of Aquarius. As late as 1918, physicians named cosmic influence as a factor in the mysteriously deadly Spanish flu. Influence and influenza have the same etymology, of flowing in, as of unseen ethereal forces. If the plague had been sent to punish people for their sins, Matteo Villani, a 14th century historian, compared it to the Great Flood and ultimate purpose. You might think that the period following the plague years would be one of great austerity. If anything, the opposite is the case. Survivors of the plague did not become ascetic. Instead, they may have sensed a baffling meaninglessness to their being spared. Survivor's guilt being a kind of miserable apprehension of one's own good luck. If the purpose had been to shake man from his sinful ways, Tuckman writes, it had failed. People embraced a more disordered and shameful life, and behavior grew more reckless and callous, as it often does after a period of violence and suffering. You could also say not much had changed at all, though a third of the world had died. What was the human condition after the plague? Exhausted by deaths and sorrows and the morbid excesses of fear and hate, it ought to have shown some profound effects, but no radical change was immediately visible. The persistence of the normal is strong. Or, as William H. McNeill writes in Plagues and Peoples, the plague on some level was a routine crisis of human life. Many at the time seemed to take this mass die-off in stride, like the weather. It's paradoxical how quickly we adapt to suffering. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I apologize for forcing you to rush through your dinner.
No, my fault completely.
We're very glad to have you here, and I'm so happy to be doing this myself. I do have to warn you in advance that it has been months since I've conversed, so I might be even less articulate than you would have imagined. But I do want to congratulate you on this. The coverage has been excellent, and it's been everywhere, which is always encouraging to see. But perhaps unsurprisingly, I want to resist some of the coverage you've gotten thus far because of the way the book has been characterized. Right, so several people I've noticed have framed this as kind of Gabbert's big book of bad. These are fascinating and beautiful essays about bad things. And your preoccupation doesn't seem to be with badnesses or traumas, or disasters so much as with asymmetries, right? Sometimes literally asymmetries. So things that are too big, things that aren't equal and balanced relative to our perception of them, maybe. Am I just making this up, or is there something about asymmetry as a feature of life, particularly of contemporary life, that has drawn you in?
That's so smart. I love that word. That's not something that I've thought about when I've been trying to figure out how to describe the book to people, but I'm probably one of the worst people to describe the book. I feel like I'm too close to it, and I'm sick of it, and I just start parroting the jacket copy. So, but I mean, I think you're right on the one hand that, and I think this happens a lot with just sort of critical reception and reviews, is they all sort of echo each other. So that, I feel like certain parts of the book or aspects of the book just never get mentioned. And those might be the parts that I'm most interested in because nobody's talking about them. But something that I think always interests me is just counterintuitiveness, which is maybe another way to think of asymmetry, or at least it's a related concept. So just when people do the exact opposite of what you would expect them to do, or just something that seems like totally wild and unbelievable about like the human mind or body, that's the kind of thing that, I tend to get obsessed with and focus on. And it just somehow seemed relevant, or maybe I forced it into relevance with this book, which has been packaged up as sort of a book about like disasters and the apocalypse. But like the part of it that I was really most interested in was just sort of like, what's wrong with us? Like, why do we think about things the way we do, in this way that seems to completely like not rise to the occasion. Like we're not solving these problems. They somehow seem to be getting worse the more that we obsess about them.
That suggests something really interesting to me, and so I want to skip ahead to another question that also draws on some of your poetry. Right, and yeah, it's going to sound odd to put it this way, but I hope you'll bear with me for a second. As a writer, I love the way you stop. Right? It's a feature of both your poetry and your essays that you aren't just willing, right, but that you are apparently delighted to stop instead of conclude. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So last winter, I was teaching a few Gia Tolentino essays, and the students sometimes complained that she didn't tell them what she thought, or by proxy, what they should think, but rather, kind of made a problem and then just stepped away from it. And you seem to go even farther than this, and that you seem to have a little of a taste for futility, right? For demonstrating that a thing just can't be done, then reminding us that we're going to try anyway. I think I saw it even a few months ago in a review you had in the New York Review of Books about climate and poetry, like climatological crisis. And, kind of floating throughout the entire review was this very plausible suspicion that it was understandable why someone would try to do this, but that the attempt was guaranteed to fail from the jump. So it's a kind of cheerful reconciliation with futility. It's not despairing at all. Is that how it feels on your end, right? That there is a kind of peace in it?
Oh gosh, I don't I'm looking out the window because it just started snowing.
You're getting all the weather.
I don't feel at peace in my day-to-day life most of the time. I wish I could say that I did. God, especially this year, to say nothing of, I started writing this book in 2016, and, I was definitely despairing a lot then, but, then as we do, as, kind of I just alluded to in that passage, We tend to get used to things. You can get used to anything. And I'd sort of gotten used to like life under Trump, as horrible as it was. And now like, oh my God, like now everything is worse. Everything is worse for everybody. Like however shitty or great your life was, it's definitely worse now. It's definitely much worse. So yeah, no, I do feel a lot of despair. But, part of the reason I love writing is that I can suspend that. Like it's a process through which I feel like I gain a lot of perspective, and I can sort of be my smartest and my best self and break patterns of just like what my friend would call like depression thoughts or anxiety thoughts, and have this kind of like, not global because I'm still just me and I'm still stuck on my perspective, but I can sort of fool myself into having this greater historical perspective by reading about things that have been happening for centuries, and feeling less like what happens this minute or tomorrow or this week matters quite so much. I mean, it does still matter. Like if we're going to make any of these things better, we have to do things. But yeah, it's like thinking about the ultimate sort of futility of everything does get you out of the frustration of like immediate futility somehow, if that answers your question at all. But yeah, that was a good word. I do really enjoy like art that's about futility, like Beckett, or I just read Michael Kohlhaas, and I felt like that was a novel that was very much about like, one man is just like, he just decides to like ruin his own life for no good reason. And like, it's for this great cause, but like, there's no way that it's going to work out. Like you can just see that like it's pointless and like, it's going to end badly. So yeah, I don't know. I don't want that to make it sound like I don't believe that we should act, or, like I believe in activism. I think, there are absolutely tangible ways that we can make people's lives better, both people who are alive now and like people in the future. We owe I almost said we owe a debt to them, but that doesn't really make any sense, does it? Future debt. We owe something to the people who will be alive in the future, the same as we do the people who are alive now. And so, yeah, I guess that's just like a dichotomy in the book maybe, or in the way I think, like it's that zooming out versus zooming in thing where it feels like we can't affect real change, and yet I believe that we have to try to affect real change, if that makes sense.
I think it's a pretty commonly distributed dichotomy, but when you're writing, it's interesting to contemplate which one you choose and why. Right. For example, you will routinely depict things that are very emotionally intense. Right? You will even, write about like very profound emotional reactions on your part, but you don't try to induce that emotion, right? You try to kind of clearly narrate it. And so, the more familiar one becomes with your work, I think the more one is compelled to wonder, well, which is she? Right? Is she the one she's describing, or is the person I'm experiencing in this writing the one who's doing the depicting? Like, oh, I
Yeah.
had the feelings, but what you're reading right now is not about having the feelings. It's about my articulation of them. So it doesn't like read as passive at all. It just has a kind of equanimity to it. Does
That's
that make sense?
fantastic. Yeah. See, I love that. I love that we're doing this because you're asking totally different questions than everyone else has asked me. I do think that you have to create, like, I didn't even really do this consciously because it's not like I was writing a memoir, but I do think unconsciously you create a character of yourself whenever you write about yourself. And so when the essays do become more personal, and it's often just like a passage in an essay that's really more kind of about synthesizing research. Yeah, it's that distance that I talk about in like Vanity Project, for example, about how like you see yourself in the third person when you're when you're either kind of in the midst of a memory or also a fantasy, like even if I'm just making something else or imagining the future, like I tend to kind of see it like it's a little bit of a movie, which is not how I dream. I've heard that some people dream in the third person, which I find fascinating. But yeah, so when I'm writing about myself, there is that same degree of distance. And, you know, I think that's what ends up creating that tone of kind of like, this has all been processed and thought through, and I'm just guiding you through it. And I'm just full of this, you know, placid, non-heated perspective that, you know, I don't necessarily feel from day to day, like living through life right now. But yeah, writing helps me achieve that. And it's something that I do kind of strive to achieve, I guess, that sort of coolness. That's just become a part of my voice that I think, you know, you've seen that in my poetry too, because I know that you've read my poetry. There tends to be that cool distance, and between, like, you know, in poetry we always say the speaker instead of the narrator. Like,
Right.
the speaker of the poems is kind of like frosty, maybe.
Well, this is one of the reasons why I encourage everyone to read all of your books, right? To get all of them, because they end up creating this very compelling writerly portrait by mosaic style, right? Because none of it is ever really, you know, memoir-like or explicitly autobiographical at length, but you revisit things. Right, you know, so even in you know, the relationship between the word pretty and this collection, right? When you are talking, you know, about dreams or houses, right? You know, when you're talking about John, right? You know, we end up with a substantial amount of information, right? That, you know, that ends up constituting a kind of personhood, but because it's all by misdirection, right? You know, we get to kind of hold those versions of you, you know, in this odd, but I think very beautiful juxtaposition, right? You know, you as the person who experiences things, and then you as the person who translates that experience to us very, you know, very directly. And even in your poetry, right? You know, you make these very lucid, right, kind of in some ways unarguable sentences. And in that other collection, in The Word Pretty, you make a claim for paragraphs as worthy of attention in lieu of sentences. And so you suggest that there's something about white space, right, that appeals to a lyric sensibility. And that makes me wonder about poets as essayists, right, which is a thing now. And you think there's something about a poet's brain as opposed to a poet's prose that makes these essays work.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I really wanted to talk to you about this idea of the poet's prose, because I think, as you say, it's like there's a little bit of a trend maybe in the past few years for poets to publish books of prose and essays or criticism. And like, I feel like I hear a lot that people love it. I mean, I like it. I've been reading this big anthology of Robert Hass essays, and his essays are like fantastic. I'm connecting to them much more than I ever connect. I don't dislike his poetry, but like, I just feel really like, oh my God, he thinks just like I do. And so that might be a poetry thing. And yeah, I wonder if it's a little bit that poets are more permissive with themselves, in terms of kind of thinking lyrically, which I would say is like associatively making leaps. You know, it's like that tweet, like, we get it, poets, things are like other things. Like, just
Right.
making odd or surprising comparisons. You know, that might be something of what's happening, being a little bit less like trained than, say, a journalist. So like the way that I approach even the most journalistic of my essays, I don't feel like any of them are very journalistic, but the one in this book that I think is the most journalistic, it's that way because I wrote it for a newspaper. I wrote it for The Guardian long read. And my editor sort of pushed me in more journalistic directions, but like I'm very uncomfortable doing interviews, for example, with like real live people. Like I wasn't trained to do that because I didn't like go to journalism school, and I don't know how to be objective. Like I feel like I'm talking to a person and I want to please them and make them happy. And and even if I just like email somebody and ask them a question and then I like, you know, disagree with them in the piece later, I feel bad. So like my preference would always be to just like read a book and talk about what someone said in a book, and like all the better if they're dead. So there's no way that I'm going to hurt their feelings. So yeah, and maybe that's a poet thing. Like I'm shy. I don't know, but I always wonder about the fact that it's like, it feels like almost trivia, you know, like a lot of times it's mentioned that I'm a poet and the reviews of my books of prose. And it always sounds like
it's this novelty feature.
Yes,
The
yes.
poet.
And it's always dropped in like, oh, of course it's very well written. Gabbert is a poet. And I'm like, why would that make you think that I know how to write prose? Like, like that could make you suspicious. But there seems to be this belief that like, well, of course a poet's gonna be a good writer. Like, you know, I guess they have a good vocabulary. I don't know. I'm not even sure what that means. Like,
I think that is hugely ironic, because if I had to guess as to why, like if there is any consistent reason for poet as essayist appeal, it has to do that when you are reading a poet's poetry, you have to contend with what they think is interesting, but also what they think is beautiful. And when they are writing prose, right, you have to contend with what they think is interesting. Try to get some of the beauty in there, right? But they're more likely to get it in there structurally. Right? And I think that just, you know, in general, it is easier to hold someone's attention by saying, oh my God, look at this interesting shit, than holding their attention by saying, isn't it interesting and so beautiful? Because the filter of one's own sense of beauty is potentially so narrow, right? So idiosyncratic. Does that make sense?
I think that's brilliant, because like when a novel, for example, is described as very poetic or lyrical, it's not always the case, but often I'm like, oh, I'm probably not going to like it. because I actually tend to think that it's overwrought and overwritten, because you can tell from page one, like, oh, this writer is trying to sound beautiful. Like they're trying to make really beautiful sentences. And you're just like,
it's like trying to drink cream.
Yeah, just like, you know, filigree. And like, that's exactly right. Like that I would so much rather be interesting than, like, I would so much rather, I mean, it's nice when someone says, oh, you write a beautiful sentence. But then when they provide an example, like to me, it's always more like, well, that's just like an interesting sentence, because like, it's an interesting idea. And like, I'm attached to the phrasing maybe, or like if there's a comma or not, but I also think like, well, it probably could be rephrased and still be interesting, because it's not really about the beauty of the words so much. It's just like, I think that idea is fascinating. And so like, I want it to remain fascinating in translation or whatever, you know, like I don't care that much about the English language. I don't know, that's overstating it. I do care about the English language. I get very attached to little like words, and like when I was reading that passage, for example, I remember there's a part where I like conceded to my editor to cut one of my kind ofs, even though I'm like, I think that particular kind of was important. And so that ghost is like in my memory, and I almost just read it the way I originally had the sentence. But
that I do know is almost uniform among the poet essayists, which is that they give an editor fewer immediate problems, but they fight so much harder over everything. What
yeah,
about the section?
I'm a fighter.
The intensity I would have thought about a poem nobody wants to read.
Yes, yeah, I'm a fighter, and I think you're right. It's because like you're so used to perfecting every word, and you usually don't have to fight for those choices when you publish a poem. Like it's very rare that, you know, for those of you who are not poets who are in the audience, it's very rare that an editor says, yes, I want to publish this, but I'm going to send you some line edits. Like
Right.
That's really
And so
rare.
I think even in the essays, even though there's a lot of white space, the writer is likely to imagine it as seamless, right? It looks like there's room to negotiate, but that wasn't what it was like on the production end. Let me ask you one more question before I check in with John, because it's where we met. What's your relationship to the internet these days? I used to appear there, and that's mainly how we know each other. But now I only appear for supplies and like really sequestered environments. So what is the internet to you now as someone who is still participating in it, especially since it's become even more of a replacement than it was already?
Yeah. Yeah. I think in a lot of ways, it's gotten much harder to be online. So like, congratulations, by the way, for, for mostly leaving it,
Thank you.
although I miss you. Um, yeah, it's gotten harder and like more unhappy making. And I think that's a combination of a couple of things. Part of it is just that, yeah, like things are scarier. And so everybody feels more on edge and angry, and there's a righteousness and an importance to that anger. I mean, like I said in that essay, like we don't deserve to be happy, right? But it's still like, it's a lot to subject yourself to. And yeah, I mean, every time you post anything on the internet, it's like you're kind of inviting someone to criticize you for putting it the wrong way or for having the wrong thought or feeling. And that has gotten worse, both as I've like, I have more followers on Twitter than I used to. So the potential exposure is greater. And I also just think that the algorithms are different. Like, you know, back in the day when we used to chat on Twitter, like most people just saw the tweets like as they happened, and it was just the people you followed, and that was how the timeline occurred. And now, like, you know, most people check their phone and they see the tweets that are getting the most engagement. They may not be from people they follow. And so that creates what our mutual friend Mike Walsh always calls perverse incentives. Or people like, you know, realize, or maybe they don't realize, maybe it's subconscious, I don't know, but either, yeah, tweeting things that create really strong reactions in people, you're going to get more attention for that. And so it's kind of like, you know, just like subtly or not so subtly pushing everybody to be like extra emotional and emphatic and like to form strong opinions instantly. So that's unpleasant. But yeah, I've always had kind of lonely days because I work from home. Even before all this, I worked from home. I have been for like 9 years working from home. So like, I don't have coworkers to chat with. And so when I would like, you know, take a break from looking at my computer and, you know, turn and chat to the person next to me, if I was in an office space, that's when I would look at Twitter to like see, oh, what are people chatting about? Get a little of that human interaction buzz. And that's just so habitual to me that like, even when I'm like, I hate this is making me unhappy, but I'm like, I keep doing it. Like right now I'm doing it and I hate it, you know, like it's really hard to stop. And I mean, also I had a book to promote. So like, I would also be like an awkward year to quit social media because I wanted to like tell people about my book events and stuff. So yeah, I feel a little bit trapped on the internet a lot of the time. every now and then it's not so bad, but I do kind of miss, like, I don't know when the good old days were, but I feel like there were good old days.
I'm just going to associate myself with the good old days. But it does seem like another possible asymmetry to me, right? And that we hyperbolicize our experience through that really narrow corridor because there's so much we feel we have to do outside of it and so little we can, right? How much we know versus how much we can do. But yeah, I definitely would not want to be explaining to a junior publicist why I was promoting a book and hopping off the internet at the same time. So let's get John back in here and see what some of those actual readers have to say.
We have one question so far. Please feel free to continue to send me your questions, even as I ask them. You can be typing them and sending them to me if you'd like. First question is, could you talk about, and this relates to your conversation about prose so far, but could you talk about your evolution of your prose from the word pretty to the unreality of memory? The content shifts, of course, but I'm curious how you think about the style and form changing, lengthening, or otherwise evolving.
Yeah, it has changed quite a bit. Most of the essays in the word pretty are pretty short. A lot of them are like 1,000 to 1,500 words, and almost bloggy. They're like, there was this kind of approach I was taking, especially with the ones that are more like criticism, where I was just like, hey, I want to think about punctuation today, or like, hey, I want to think about this one like theme that I really like in novels, and here's a few recent examples. And they were super casual, not very edited or revised, just kind of like the thoughts as I had them the day that I wrote them. And there are a few like slightly longer pieces in that book, but a lot of them are that kind of just like, this is sort of a short riff. And I used to love doing stuff like that. And then at some point I started writing these kind of, longer form essays, like more 3,000 to 5,000 words, say, is probably the average. And it's definitely a different exercise. Like, it takes longer, there's a lot more planning, there's a lot more research or thinking. If it's like book criticism, I wouldn't call it research per se, but like reading and taking notes and kind of compiling thoughts and ideas, because you have to think a lot more about the structure, I think, when it's a longer piece. And so I got a lot more interested in structure when I was writing these pieces. And it's just like a totally different process, because often they're kind of cut into sections that are about the length of like a full essay in the word pretty. So I started to think of each section almost as like a mini essay, or like a movement of the larger piece. And so it's like you can no longer see the whole thing in your mind all at once, in a way. And, for people who write really long form things, like, a long nonfiction book that isn't broken up into essays, or a novel, I think it must, get like that, but even more so, where like, you can only see your little part of the trail, you can't see the whole mountain. And I created like new problems that I found really interesting. And now it's gotten really hard for me to write short things. So anytime I have to write something that's under 1,500 words, it's so difficult. I always end up writing longer now and then having to cut. And I'm just like, no, I really want that extra adjective, or like that extra little quibbling phrase, or like, I want to add that one parenthetical that's like, but maybe not, or maybe this other thing. And I could do that like endlessly. Like, it's like you could always add another shade of meaning if you had to make something longer. So it changed the way I write, pretty much.
But that invites, a pretty logical follow-up question, right? So that if moving from the length of the, smaller pieces in the word pretty to this bigger length is your kind of hyper-object horizon, right? That are, bigger than you can wrap your mind around at once.
Yeah.
And if you're pointed in that direction already, how big a sustained nonfiction project do you think you have in you? Is there anything that is kind of surfacing at the moment?
Right now, I'm not learning anything or challenging myself at all. I'm trying to finish a book of poems. So they are like a sort of different form than my previous books of poems. So I whenever I'm writing a book of poems, I always feel like I have to like make up like a shape, a form really, that like, this is how I'm going to work. And I'm just going to write a bunch of poems that look like this until I have a book. And so I've kind of created a new form like that. And I've been working on that. And I've been writing some like kind of longer critical essays. So I feel like they're more like in style and theme, the essays in the word pretty, but they're more at the length of the essays in the Unreality of Memory. So I could see that kind of coming together into a collection. But yeah, there's nothing new there, but like, I really like the idea of at some point doing like a book length essay, like something like, Sarah Manguso would do. where it's kind of like in sections or fragments, but it like,
I don't know
but it's just one
how,
long essay.
I don't know how she does it. My favorite and most interesting writers are always the ones whose work I can't begin to reverse engineer. And in Manguso's case, those things always read to me like she really did just sit down one day, write the entire thing from the first word to the last word, and then maybe like cleaned it up a little after, but it just appeared.
Oh
And
yeah.
I mean, I know it can't happen that way, but how she makes it read that way, right, is extraordinary.
Yeah, yeah, they're so good. But yeah, like, so like ongoingness, like it's a short book, but it's really kind of like one long essay. So I love that. I don't have an idea in mind. I haven't started working on anything like that, but that's just like kind of a little goal in my mind. I would like to write something like that.
There's
Well,
a quick.
I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
Oh no, there's. Finish your thought.
Oh, I was just gonna say that if you're working on a new book of poetry, you're obliged to send that thing out to everyone who reviews your essays and says, "Oh, of course, this is well written. She's a poet." And you see the little note that says, "Now that I know how much you love poetry, please, yeah, please read and enjoy this new volume."
I know. I want them to review the poetry and say, well, of course this is well written. She's an essayist.
There's a question a question about the poet critics' perhaps particular attraction to facts or factoids, fun or otherwise. This is for both of you, and whether an essay idea leads to research or research tends to spawn or alter wholly the essay itself. From another very, very good poet and essayist in the audience tonight.
I know who it is.
Oh, I love that question. I do. I love facts. And I teach a class occasionally. I'm not like a teacher by trade, but I sometimes teach like a seminar class. It's a seminar, like a one-day class about expanding the personal essay. And I started it with this like slide deck of just like, I called it like 10 mind-blowing facts. So just, things I read somewhere, like probably on the internet, that totally blew my mind and sent me down like a Wikipedia rabbit hole where I was just like, I had to read about that all day. And yeah, like I love essays that include things like that, the kind of things that like just you totally remember and you tell people about for like a week when you see them. So that's, I don't know, I'm so interested in like this pattern finding where people are saying, oh, that's a poet thing, because I didn't even recognize that as a poet thing. But yeah, for me, often it'll be like something like that, like I'll run across something like that and kind of file it away. And then if I run across another thing that feels sort of related and like, ooh, these are starting to accrue into a little collection of related interesting facts. And that's when I'll kind of decide like, maybe I want to write about this and start doing, kind of research for real, which to me would be like going to the library as opposed to just clicking links on Wikipedia for 2 hours. And yeah, so I think part of the reason I haven't been doing a lot of research-based essays this year is because I haven't been able to go to the library really. I so miss just like, wandering around and seeing what's on the new books table, or my library has like a recently returned books table that I really love because it's just random books, like new, old, all genres. And I've often found really fascinating books on that table.
I have this list that I've never published, but I keep adding to it, and I'm going to keep adding to it until I get to 100, and it's going to be the 100 facts every poet loves. Right, so they are because you see them, right, distributed across essays and poems, things that for some reason, these shiny fact objects that everyone else passes by, but a poet immediately is like, oh, that is something worth knowing.
Right. It's like how our atoms come from stars or whatever. Like, something about the moon.
Once the list is complete, every poet will recognize every item on the list with a combination of shame and affection. But the reason I think the list would be fun to see is because it does point out, I think, something about the difference between like really purely vertical mining, right, for research, and a kind of lateral mining, right, where you find something and then you look to the left and the right of that thing instead of what the next logical thing is. Because as a sort of game or test, right, the intuition is that there's a constellation here, right, and if I choose the right objects, I can make the constellation pop. Right, that's what makes the fact interesting, is the way it can be made evidential of some other less obvious or intuitive thing. And the kind of game-like element of that, I think, is just irresistible for poets. Right?
Yeah, and that's part of my thing with paragraphs too, is like a paragraph is like a setting for a great sentence or a couple of great sentences. Like, I think the context is just as interesting as sort of the sentence in isolation.
Yeah, I mean, it is white space, but it works like black velvet, right? Like, I'm going to place things very deliberately here, right? Yeah, so that constellation snaps into focus. And I think for me, the other thing about facts that I really enjoy is their kind of intransigence or their immutability. Right? I can place this in a relationship with other things, but thank God I can't actually do anything to it. It's a fact. and there's something about the sheer stubborn facticity of a fact that is appealing in its own right, maybe.
Have you heard, or do you know, because you've been published in the New Yorker, I don't know, that they fact check poems?
Oh, the worst.
I just heard that last year and I was like, what? That's amazing. Like, how? What?
I feel like that is a crime against literature.
Like, so then I inquired about it and I was like, wait, what do you mean? Like, if you're telling a personal anecdote, like, are you going to call people? And I think no, I don't think they go that far. But if there's something that appears fact-like a factoid, like something that either the author might want to seem like a true fact or that readers might expect to be a true fact, they fact check it. And then I think, like, if they flag and they're like, this isn't this isn't true, I think that you can say, I know, but it's a poem, and they'll be like, okay, we just wanted to let you know. But like, it does go through that process. Again, this is what I don't know. I haven't been in the New Yorker.
I love that they would justify it by actually elucidating the matter for the poet. Like, maybe you don't know what the difference is between true and false, but we're the New Yorker and we do. And I know you like making shit up, but we need you to know that we know that you have made this up. Like, okay, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, if I'm ever lucky enough to be put in place by the New Yorker, I'll just have to let it.
Yeah.
John, do we have anything else on that?
Well, there's one more question that's related to process and composition. And so I apologize if this has already sort of been across several answers answered, but do you find yourself reading and then coming up with the idea from there? There's so many ideas that you stitch together so well. Do you do that in reverse or as you write? So is it, I guess I should have asked the first part of this question, which is, do you read and compile the thoughts first?
Yeah, so I'll say that I always read with like a pencil or a notebook, or when I used to read a lot of library books, I would use like sticky tabs. Because if I'm reading a book that has like a lot of things I kind of want to underline or note down or have thoughts about, like I want to make sure that I sort of mark those pages and I can come back to them. And it's part of the way that I kind of figure out what books I want to read and what books I don't. If I get through 20, 25 pages and I haven't marked anything, it's sometimes the case that I'm like, okay, there's every sentence is so great, I don't need to mark anything on it, or like the sentences aren't the point or whatever. But usually if I haven't marked anything, I'm like, this book isn't really doing it for me, and I'll stop reading it. But if I'm marking a lot, I'll start taking notes. Like I'll get a little piece of paper and start writing some notes and stick it into the book, and I'll keep adding to it while I'm reading. And then every book that I finish, I sort of type up a little, almost like a review, like for myself. But it's mostly just like, these were my thoughts and impressions about the book, just like a quick paragraph. And it just kind of helps me remember like what I've read and what I liked about it. And I'll often like type up a line or two. And then at the end of the year, I publish them all. So people can go to it for book recommendations or whatever. It's just a habit I've been doing for the past 5 or 6 years. And so usually it's not like I do that and then I'm like, oh, these 10 different books I had notes for and they come together. If I am having enough ideas around a certain book that I'm like, I really want to write about this, I'll kind of focus in and start collecting other books. And I'll start, because I have to like tell myself that I'm working on something to be working on something, like that makes it real. And so I'll start like an actual Word document on my computer where I'm like, oh, these are notes about X. And so I'll start like getting books from the library or from my own library. You can see we have a big library behind us. I'm always discovering stuff on those shelves I didn't know we had. And I'll start kind of like being a little bit more intentional and like curatorial about it, I guess. Like it stops being kind of this sort of happenstance thing, and I'm saying like, oh, I'm looking for stuff about this. I'm like actively looking for books that I think relate to this topic. And then I'm really kind of collecting and thinking about like where this essay could go, how I might structure it and stuff like that. Like what are the kind of key ideas I want to build the essay around? So I think like it starts off more chancy and then it becomes a lot more deliberate.
I think we might be pushing our time, even though I feel really bad for all of these Mountain Time people who just showed up. They were right on time. But I want to ask if we do have a couple of extra minutes, since you do have really good coverage for this very beautiful book, and you've had enough events behind you now. Is there anything in the book that you have wanted to talk about or have covered that has somehow thus far escaped attention in the publicity circus?
I mean, like the more events and interviews I do, the more of my kind of dream questions are getting ticked off the list. So like, I feel like I shouldn't jinx it because, I've had really good luck and been asked and surprised with great questions. I often kind of secretly wish somebody would ask me about the cover, which I guess, almost nothing to do with me, except that I sent my publisher just a questionnaire. It was like a 5-question questionnaire about what I want or didn't want the cover to look like. And it was really interesting because you can tell that it's like designers trying to get you to speak their language. And one of the questions was like, what's your least favorite color? And I was like, do most people even have a least favorite color? But yeah, so they were like, you can send us, inspiration if there's things that you like, things that you don't like. And I only sent them one image, and it was this old edition of The Myth of Sisyphus by Camus that has a Magritte painting on the cover. I forget the name of the painting, but it's this like kind of round rock, like floating, and there's like mountains in the background. And so you can tell that the cover is kind of like directly inspired by that, but in a oblique way that you wouldn't necessarily like look at it and think like, oh, it's like an illustrated version of that Magritte painting. But yeah, I loved the oblique reference. Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Because it's the other collection where you kind of, drag Magritte for the possibility of, oh, I'm a completely literal painter. Right?
That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah. So yeah, I always like really kind of like wonky, little wonkish, I guess is the right adjective for like questions about like details of making the book, which, you know, of course, like the average person doesn't care about at all. So like I'm always wishing for questions like that. But other than that, yeah, I've gotten really lucky.
I do have one question in that regard, because you have, as we discussed previously, that subset of references that recur. You know, when you read the essays in isolation, right, you get a kind of, you know, you get a microcosmic model of that reference set. But then when you had to put them in order, right, you had, I'm sure you had to think about, well, wait a minute, I'm going to mention this again later, or I've already mentioned something like this, right? You know, what does that create, or what does that suggest? And I was very curious when I was reading it if you moved any of those pieces in and out of the essays in which they originally appeared so as to manage that cumulative effect.
Yeah, that was tricky. It was definitely like intentional, but also probably a little overdone in the first draft that I turned into my editor. And there were a couple times where he was like, you know, you already said this, right? And I was like, yeah, but maybe I could like make it a little bit less, like maybe I can change it a little or cut it back a little bit. So, I mean, there were definitely times where it was like 2 sentences in a row that were like almost the exact same 2 sentences. So I did make some changes once I could kind of see like, oh, this is how I want the flow to be. And there were a couple of times where, you know, there's like, you know, I think one of the things about the book is that I did have like the same thought as a new realization in totally different contexts. So, it might, you know, I might feel like you're getting the same information twice, but to me it was like I genuinely like just thought that again, and like it felt like new and fresh and interesting to me all over again because I was thinking about other things when it occurred to me. And so like I wanted to preserve that effect as much as I could, but sometimes it was like, oh, maybe like the weaker version came first, and then I don't know, there's just like I feel like I didn't get it completely perfect. It's really hard. It's really hard to make a book, but I did my best.
I actually really loved those moments. I love seeing that stuff because it was a way of quietly reminding the reader that the essays don't come from nowhere, right? That these, you know, these are not, you know, that they are made things, right? And that it's a nice counterpoint to what you described previously as that kind of coolness, right? Like, yes, this is, you know, cool and artful and composed, but it still comes from a human person in a human place, you know, in a very kind of, you know, human context. So I thought that ended up having a really lovely balancing effect. Okay, I'm gonna hand this back over to John, and yeah, again, we apologize, Mountain Time people. It just happened.
Well, I wish we could go on a lot longer. I would love to, but we're reaching the top of the hour. Thank you both so much for such a really lovely conversation. We appreciate it. You can purchase the book, The Unreality of Memory, at our bookstore. I'm going to put the link in the chat one more time in case you don't have a copy yet for whatever reason, so that you can go get it. There's the link there. Elisa Gabbert, Ray McDaniel, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone else, thank you for joining us as well. We hope you can